problem is that it does make a difference, but it's one of probability. If you buy one package of bacon, that doesn't mean that the grocery store that you bought it from like automatically purchases one more package of bacon and that like, one more pig is killed.
Whenever the topic of the debate is ethics, politics, anything involving political authority, I think it's a real warning. It's a real red flag when people pose the problem in terms of probability, in terms of odds, in terms of chances. To give a really brief example, if we're debating whether or not the United States should use torture in investigating terrorism, and someone says to you, oh, well, what are the odds? What are the chances that a completely innocent person is going to be tortured here? In a subtle way that lets you know that they're viewing the problem with such a skew, with such a distorting bias, that they're skipping over the most fundamental issues here. Either we're opposed to the use of torture and interrogations, or we are not. Why is this being posed in terms of odds or probability at all?
Instead, there's a tipping point. If you buy a package of bacon, there is a certain probability that the, manager of the butcher part, the meat person, whatever the hell you call those people, there's a certain probability that he or she will say, hey, we keep selling out of bacon early. Maybe we should go ahead and order an extra case.
Way back when I lived in the city of Toronto, I knew some people who were kind of aspiring political activists or dissidents, and they would present arguments. For example, at that time, it was popular for people to claim that you should refuse to buy anything manufactured in China, because if you bought something made in China, you were supporting China's oppression of Tibet. That issue came and went. Today, you might hear that more commonly said about Israel-Palestine conflict or this kind of thing. And I would ask them, do you think it's a legitimate argument to tell someone that they should refuse to use cocaine because of the odds, because of the probability, as stated here, that they're paying for one person to shoot another person, one person to stab another person, whether it's the drug production, the drug smuggling, the cross-border traffic, rival gangs fighting each other, or the drug addicts stealing so they can afford the books. Do you not think you're paying money into a cycle of suffering that's immoral and unethical here? And for me, the point was the probability-based argument is ultimately absurd. It's ultimately irrelevant. What I want to get to in this discussion, whether we're using Socratic method or not, what I want to get to is whether or not there's a chance that by buying this particular bag of cocaine, whether or not there's a chance that you're paying for a human life to be taken, that somebody was killed to get this cocaine to you. There's a chance. There are odds. There are statistics. There's a probability you're paying for a human life that was lost to produce, smuggle, or deal this cocaine. Okay? But to me, that's ridiculous. There's a 100% chance that if you use cocaine, you're a cokehead. If you use crack, you're a crackhead. What's 100% certain is the judgment on your character, is the answer to the question, what kind of person do you want to be? It's the question of what kind of moral responsibility you are going to take for your own actions that inevitably have their own consequences.
With every consumer action, we're talking about a small chance of making a much larger difference. The same is true of the stoning, right?
So to be clear, the truly bizarre comparison she is making here is between a consumer boycott and executing someone by stoning. So this is a form of execution found in the Bible, which is to say a crowd of people holding stones, throwing stones at someone again and again until they are executed. So politically and historically, a very interesting form of execution. And she is making the comparison, completely surreal, completely idiotic, between veganism as a consumer boycott, which is only one element of veganism, and execution by stoning.
There is a point in the stoning where one more rock made the difference between the person dying or not dying. If you're throwing rocks early on, you cause some bruising. If you're throwing rocks later on, the person's already going to die from kidney failure or whatever due to the accumulated injury.
No. If you participate in carrying out a death sentence against someone, if you participate as judge, jury, and executioner, it doesn't matter if you threw the heaviest rock or if you threw the tiniest pebble. By participating in the stoning, you are implicated in executing this person for witchcraft. Let's just say, as a hypothetical example, this is in biblical times, someone was accused of witchcraft and you participated, you helped to carry out the stoning. I can't imagine how she came to this fundamentally anti-vegan argument in the course of preaching veganism to someone who finds all vegan arguments utterly unconvincing. It's very strange. But by the same token, either you are someone who refuses to participate in the animal product industry, in factory farming, in slaughterhouses, so on and so forth. Either you're someone who refuses, or you're someone who participates and makes excuses for it, whether that is the tiniest pebble or the heaviest stone. So there are people who call themselves vegan, but who will wear a leather coat, and they have an excuse. They say, oh, well, my brother bought this leather coat. There are vegans, just like you, Swayze, who will buy meat, who will pay someone to kill a cow, chop it up into pieces, and put it in a can, but they have the excuse, oh, well, they're buying meat, but they're buying it to feed to their cat. They're buying it to feed to their dog. They're buying meat, but they won't eat it themselves. Okay? Maybe it's the tiniest pebble. Maybe it's the heaviest stone. But if you are actually opposed to this death sentence, if you are actually opposed to this judgment, or maybe you're opposed to persecuting and executing witches in principle in general, and this is just one example, you will not throw that stone.
If I have like a small section, a small area, and I see garbage there, I can get rid of that garbage and make my small section like better, because I have like direct control over this like thing. Much the same way that if I make like a transphobic comment to a person, there's like this area where I can have like a binary, like good or bad, like yes or no impact on a person's life, like right then and there. But when everything becomes generalized, it becomes much harder to feel like I should make like big sacrifices or go out of my way to accomplish something.
Destiny is correct in his premise here. He's just coming to the wrong conclusion, or you could say he's correct in stating this concern. He's just being dishonest in using this concern as an excuse. I have a quote here from a vegan athlete. This has been up on my blog for years. Why did you become vegan? Because I only have control over one person, myself. And I decided that I did not want to contribute to the consumer industries that cause so much unnecessary animal suffering. Once I became vegan, I realized that there are a plethora of other benefits besides just the moral and ethical reasons. If I tell you there's a civil war going on in Syria, there are terrible things happening, somebody ought to do something, you'd be quite right to feel weak and powerless, that there's no difference you can make. Why should you even try? Why should you even care? Many of the major moral, ethical, and political quandaries of our time are on such a huge scale with such enormous costs to entry. For you even to do research, for you to even visit, for you to even learn the language is a tremendous sacrifice. Okay? Unlike so many of those large-scale, overwhelming ethical problems in our time, in our lives, veganism is the difference you can make. Veganism is the difference you can make each and every day, starting today, starting right now. It is just as easy as taking 5 minutes when you go to the grocery store to buy a chocolate bar to check that you're buying a chocolate bar that does not have milk powder, as opposed to a chocolate bar that does have milk powder, which is the same thing that lactose intolerance people do every day, and they do not feel oppressed by it. When you go back to the same grocery store the second time and the 10th time, you don't have to spend 5 minutes doing that again, because it'll be the same selection of candy bars. You'll already know which ones are vegan and which ones are not. That's what we live with. That's what our ethical code means in practice. But there's a much deeper difference. There's a much deeper distinction. It has nothing to do with probabilities. It has nothing to do with far-flung future outcomes. It has to do with what kind of person you aspire to be here and now.